There's a row of bushes right here beside of me, by this house, where I was trying to pet a cat. And this is it right here. You see that little row of bushes? There's a bush there, and a bush there, and another bush over here somewhere. And that was a row of hedges. So what happened along that hedgerow, I was kneeling down there and crawling underneath trying to pet this cat, and all of a sudden scratched me. I mean, he attacked really very defensively, and I wasn't expecting that because, you know, I petted all the animals in the neighborhood. They never bothered me. I really liked animals when I was little. And I just knew something was wrong, and I looked over my shoulder. There's Frank Morris. And he goes, "Did I scare you?" He really liked to scare people. And I go, "Yeah, a little." And he goes, "That cat's really hard to catch, isn't it?" And I go, "Yeah, it's kind of weird because they usually let me pet him." And he goes, "We've been trying to catch it too. We're going to kill it later." And I go, "What? No." And he goes, "Yeah, what? I mean, this is amazing. Yeah, you ever cut their guts out? You ever see their guts?" And I go, "No, what are you talking about?" And he goes, "Yeah, they're interesting." He said, "You take their guts out and you have a little ball of guts about this big, and that little stomach of theirs, and that his intestines will stretch from here all the way down to the corner." And I was just freaking out. I was going, "This guy is gone, man. What the..." And I said, "You kill a little cat?" And he laughed, you know. And by now I had already maneuvered around because he was standing between me and my house. I'd already maneuvered around, and I took off running to the house. And I remember hearing him throw his voice going, "You're scared, aren't you? You're scared." I love this little neighborhood. Look at this old street. This is the way this street was originally made. Who knows, maybe in the 30s, out of these bricks. And then they came back and paved all these roads like that. And if I remember right, they didn't like it, and they came back and scraped the paving up and left the bricks. Or maybe they never paved this part. I don't know. I don't remember. But I remember them paving some of the roads. Anyway, beautiful old wooden houses. Someday I want to come back and buy a house here and live in this neighborhood. Now, that house over there on the left is where little Karen lived. You have to watch my video on little Karen. We used to sit out here when these trees weren't here, and we would talk, and Frank Morris would stand across the street behind me and stare at us. And they caught her in between these two houses after she came from my house. My house is over there. And she left my house and she walked around here and she walked back in there. And that's where I heard a shuffle that sounded like 3 or 4 people running around playing, maybe. I thought they were playing. And then all of a sudden I heard her scream. And what happened was they caught her and they cut her throat. Poor little girl. Rest in peace. I wish I knew where her grave was at so I could go put some flowers on it, but I really don't even remember her real name, and there's no one in this neighborhood that lived here back then. You know, for those of you who don't believe what I'm telling you, you think I'm making it up for some ridiculous reason. Why would anybody make all this up? You know, I have almost 60 videos on YouTube now about these incidents with these guys. Why fate brought me into their world at 3 different periods in my life, in 2 different neighborhoods around here, and then in Mexico City. You know, I just don't get it, but I'm gonna tell you this. I'm not gonna give up telling you everything that I remember, and I'm gonna get my book out there sooner or later, and with all of the details all put together in one place so that posterity will know who these guys were and what they did. And I want people to know that even though Clint Eastwood made a hero out of Frank Morris was a child murdering serial killer who had no respect for human life, which is very, very characteristic of psychopaths and serial killers. A life to them is just like a toy block laying on the side of the street. If it's in the way, you kick it down drain, and don't worry about it. They have no respect for other people. And I want to tell you about another attempted abduction on my life from these guys. They were, you know, as they were not able to catch me, they were catching other kids, and they would try and get the other kids to get me away from my house so that they could catch me. Now, we're going to go over to the school I used to go to. I'm not sure if it's going to look the same or not, but if it does, I'm going to show you and tell you a little story about when I was in the 2nd grade. That's how I figure that I was 5 or 6 years old during all of this. Because there was a little boy who come running up. If I remember right, they rang 2 bells. The first one meant you had 5 minutes to get to class. And this little boy comes running up to me and he says, "Hey, David, let's go skip." And I was 5 years old, you know. To me, skipping was, you know, skipping up and down the road. Like, you know, I played hopscotch with Frank Morris's little cousin or something, this girl that lived over there where they tied me to the post, and I'm pretty sure she was related to him because she looked a lot like him. But when he said, "Let's skip," I didn't know he meant skip school. I'd never heard of that before. So I go, "Okay, what are you going to..." I was standing on the concrete, and I thought, well, we're going to start skipping, you know. And he climbed underneath the bush, and he said, "Come on, let's go. We're going to skip." And I go, "What are you getting under there for?" And he goes, "Come on, we're going to skip because those guys are going to give us some presents and some candy." And I go, "What guys?" And he goes, "Those guys in that car." And I looked at that car that he was pointing to, and I remember that car looked very much like some of the other cars that I've seen Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers in. I mean, when they needed a car, they just stole it. Frank told me that in Mexico. When we need a car, we'll get one. We're here at the school that I used to go to, Cleveland Elementary, and I believe this is the road we used to walk to get there. I remember we used to wonder why they didn't have a sidewalk right there. My old elementary school, where I went from the 1st to the 3rd grade when I was a little boy, and I lived over there on Minnehaha Street. And this old school is still, this part of it is the same as it was back then, except the hedgerow was taller. You can even see the hedgerow there. Those bushes were taller then. But I can remember that when I figured out that, you know, this kid wasn't going to go to school, I walked around here and I went in that door, and there was a counselor inside there, and I just went up and told her, "Hey, this guy asked me to skip, and he never did skip, but I'm late for school." And she said, "Well, what do you mean skip? You were going to skip school?" And I go, "Not skip school, we were going to skip, I think." Anyway, she kind of laughed, and she figured out. The Anglin brothers and Frank Morris were parked right about here. And that little boy asked me to hide in the hedge with him right there. Now, this hedge was really tall back then. It was easy to hide under it. But I remember getting under there with him and going, "How are we going to skip if we're under here?" And he goes, "We're going to skip in a minute. We're going to go over there with those guys, and they're going to give us candy and presents." And I go, "Wow, something sounds weird about that." So I said, "I'm going to go to class." So I took off over here, and I went to class. I was in the 2nd grade. I remember as I was leaving, the little boy got up and went running over to that car. So I thought it was some of his family or something. I believe I even asked him, "Was it your family?" Part about the whole thing, which is not exactly the best news I have for you. The next day, when I got to school, the counselor came up to me, the same one that was waiting there in the hallway to make sure all the kids got to school, and the one that I told that, you know, this guy had asked me to skip school. And she asked me, "Have you seen that little boy since yesterday?" And I said, "No, I haven't." "Why?" And she goes, "Well, they can't find him." And I go, "What?" She goes, "Yeah, they can't find him. looked everywhere, and I told her, well, I don't know where he's at. And she goes, did he say anything to you? And I told her that he said he was going to go with these guys that were in that car, that they were going to give him candy and presents, and that they wanted me to go with him. Poor little boy, you know, they just kept it quiet at school, so nobody ever really knew that we had a missing persons problem there. And, you know, this really gets me. Those of you who don't believe me, I know a lot of you are young kids. I would really like to get it across to you kids that these guys were not the heroes that the media is making them out to be. They were killers. They started out killing little animals, and they grew up and started killing little kids, and they went from little kids to little teenagers, and then they went from little teenagers to full-grown adults. And Frank Morris considered every single murder he did to be an artistic masterpiece and a trophy. And you know, you little kids that are out there calling me a liar, I want you to know that there's a reason I'm putting these videos here. You need to watch them. You may learn something that'll save your life someday.